Jane pulled me into the corner so fast my heels nearly betrayed me. 1 second, I was laughing beside the bar with a stranger who only wanted directions to the restroom. The next second, Jane Carter had her fingers wrapped around my wrist like I was a stolen diamond she had no intention of returning. The club was alive around us, lights flashing purple, blue, and red, bass shaking the floor like the building had a heartbeat, bodies moving everywhere like waves in a storm. But in that corner, everything narrowed down to Jane. Her dark curls were slightly messy, her black shirt clinging to her like sin, her eyes burning into me with the kind of jealousy that could make angels lock their doors. "Who was she?" Jane asked. I blinked. "Who?" Her jaw tightened. "Oh. That kind of night. The woman at the bar?" I said, trying not to smile. "Jane," she asked where the bathroom was. Jane stepped closer. Too close. My back touched the wall, and suddenly the air between us became hotter than the whole club. "She touched your arm." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "You're being dramatic." "I'm always dramatic when it comes to you." That shut me up. Jane lifted one hand and placed it against the wall beside my head. Her other hand rested at my waist, not rough, not gentle either, just possessive enough to make my thoughts scatter like frightened birds. "You were smiling at her," she said. "I smile at customers. I smile at Mia. I smile at dogs." "You don't smile like that at dogs." I swallowed. "You're impossible. And you like it." "The worst part?" She was right. I hated how much I liked it. I hated how my heart turned into a foolish little drum whenever Jane acted like this. I hated that one look from her could make me forget every lecture I had ever given myself about self-respect. Jane Carter was not safe. She was a thunderstorm wearing perfume. She was trouble with pretty lips. She was the kind of woman mothers warned their daughters about, and I had clearly misplaced the warning label. "Look at me," she whispered. "I am." "No, Rose." Her voice softened, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Really look at me." So I did. And that was my mistake. Because Jane's eyes were not just eyes. They were dark, deep, merciless little oceans, and I was apparently a woman with no survival skills. I fell right in. Her thumb brushed the side of my face. The music roared behind us, but I could barely hear it. My entire world had shrunk to the warmth of her body, the shape of her mouth, the tiny spark of anger and affection fighting across her face. "You're jealous," I said. "I'm not jealous. You dragged me across a club because a woman asked me where the restroom was. She didn't need to touch you. She touched my elbow." Jane leaned in closer. "Still too much." I laughed before I could stop myself. That was when Jane kissed me. Not sweetly. Not politely. She kissed me like she had been holding back all night and patience had finally died a tragic death. The kiss stole every smart response from my head. It was warm and sudden and dramatic enough to deserve its own soundtrack. My hands flew to her shoulders, mostly because my knees had stopped behaving like responsible adults. Then, just as quickly, Jane pulled back. Her eyes dropped to my mouth. "You're laughing," she said. "I'm nervous." "Good. You're insane." "For you?" "Completely." I should have pushed her away. I should have reminded her that public jealousy was not a personality trait. Instead, I stood there, breathing like I had just run a marathon in heels, while Jane looked at me like I was both her favorite problem and her favorite solution. Then someone clapped. Slowly. Mockingly. Jane froze. I turned my head. A tall blonde woman stood near the VIP stairs, dressed in a sleek black dress that looked expensive enough to pay my rent for 3 months. Her smile was sharp, her posture relaxed, and her eyes were fixed on Jane with the confidence of someone who had once owned the room, and maybe Jane too. "Well," the woman said, voice smooth as poison. "That was quite a welcome." Jane's hand dropped from my waist. "Not fully." but enough for me to notice. My stomach tightened. Lena, Jane said. So this was Lena Brooks. The ex. The famous ex. The woman Jane never talked about unless she had wine in her hand and sadness hiding behind her sarcasm. Lena's eyes moved to me, slow and deliberate. You must be Rose. I lifted my chin. And you must be the bad decision. Jane coughed. Lena smiled wider. Oh, she's cute. I'm not cute, I said. You are, Jane muttered. I shot her a look. Wrong time, Jane. Very wrong time. Lena stepped closer, and suddenly the corner felt too small for 3 women and all their unresolved emotional damage. I didn't know you were coming, Jane said coldly. Lena tilted her head. Would you have dressed better? I dressed fine. You always did, like pretending you weren't trying. Jane's expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. That tiny crack. That flash of old pain. And something ugly twisted in my chest. Jealousy. Real jealousy. Not the funny kind. Not the flirty kind. The kind that sits low in your stomach and whispers, she knew her before you did. Lena looked at me again. So, she said, are you too serious? Jane answered too fast. Yes. I answered at the same time. It's complicated. Silence. Terrible, humiliating silence. Jane turned to me slowly. Lena looked delighted. Oh, Lena said softly. Complicated. My favorite word. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. Maybe not even the floor. The basement. The earth's core. Anywhere but that corner with Jane staring at me like I had just handed Lena a knife. Jane, I said quietly. But Jane stepped back. Just one step. It felt like a mile. Mia suddenly appeared beside me with 2 drinks and the worst timing ever created by nature. Okay, why does this corner feel like a lesbian courtroom? Nobody answered. Mia looked from Jane to Lena to me. Oh no, she whispered. This is ex-girlfriend weather. Lena laughed. Jane didn't. She simply looked at me, her face unreadable now, all the fire locked behind glass. I need air, she said. Then she walked away. And because I was apparently determined to ruin my own life, I didn't follow immediately. I stood there, frozen, while Lena leaned closer and whispered, careful with Jane, sweetheart. She bites hardest when she's scared. My pulse skipped. What does that mean? Lena smiled like she had already won something. It means you're not the first woman she has kissed like the world was ending. Then she walked past me into the crowd, leaving her perfume behind like evidence at a crime scene. Mia touched my arm. Rose? But I was already moving. I pushed through dancers, past flashing lights and laughing strangers, my heart banging against my ribs like it wanted to escape before I made another bad choice. I found Jane outside behind the club, standing under the weak yellow glow of a street lamp while rain misted the pavement. She didn't turn around. Go back inside, she said. No. Rose. No, Jane. She laughed bitterly. So now you know how to be sure? That hurt. I stepped closer. I panicked. You called us complicated. We are complicated. Jane turned then, eyes sharp and wounded. Not to me. The rain grew heavier. Cars hissed past on the wet street. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Jane looked away. And that was worse than her anger. I don't know what you want from me, she said. I walked closer, careful, like approaching a flame. I want you. Her eyes flicked back to mine. My voice trembled, but I kept going. You scare me. You confuse me. You make me want to scream into pillows and write poetry like a dramatic fool. But I want you, Jane. Her face softened. Only a little. You mean that? Yes. Even when I'm jealous? Especially when you're jealous, I admitted. But maybe less, dragging me across rooms like stolen luggage. A laugh broke out of her. Small. Beautiful. Enough to save the night from collapsing completely. Jane stepped toward me. Rain dotted her lashes. Her curls clung slightly to her face. She looked unfairly gorgeous, like Heartbreak had hired a stylist. Your trouble, Rose Miller. I smiled. You started it. She reached for my hand. This time, gently. And when she kissed me under that street lamp, it wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about Lena. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone inside that club. It was softer. Slower. Still dangerous. But honest. Then her phone buzzed. Jane pulled back, annoyed, and looked at the screen. Her entire face changed. I saw the message before she could hide it. Lena, tell Rose what really happened between us, or I will. The rain suddenly felt cold. Jane went still. I stared at her. What happened between you two? Jane didn't answer. And just like that, the night cracked open. The rain outside the club fell like shattered glass from heaven. Cold. Sharp. Endless. Jane stood under the weak yellow streetlight staring at her phone while I stared at her. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed properly. That message from Lena sat between us like a loaded gun. Tell Rose what really happened between us, or I will. Every romantic movie I had ever watched suddenly turned into a horror film inside my head. What happened? I asked quietly. Jane locked her phone. Too fast. Nothing. I laughed once. A dry, unbelieving sound. That's never a good answer. Rose? No. Don't rose me. My chest tightened painfully. You looked terrified. Jane rubbed her forehead. I'm not terrified. You looked like you saw a ghost. Jane's jaw flexed. Rainwater slid down her neck beneath the open collar of her black shirt, and somehow she still looked unfairly attractive while emotionally ruining my evening. Honestly? That should have been illegal. She likes causing problems, Jane muttered. That's not what I asked. Silence. The city lights blurred across the wet streets around us. Cars hissed through puddles nearby while music from inside the club vibrated faintly through the walls behind us. Jane finally looked at me. And there it was again. That tiny crack in her confidence. That scared me more than shouting ever could. She cheated on me, Jane said quietly. My anger paused. Oh. Jane laughed bitterly. Yeah. Oh. I swallowed hard. She cheated on you with who? Jane looked away. That's the problem. The knot in my stomach tightened. What does that mean? Another silence. Then. My sister. My brain physically stopped working for 2 full seconds. What? Jane's laugh sounded empty. Exactly. Rain dripped from her curls while she stared out at the road like she hated herself for even saying the words out loud. I found out 3 years ago, she continued. Lena and my older sister had been sleeping together behind my back for months. Holy hell. I blinked at her. You're serious? I wish I wasn't. The jealousy I'd felt earlier instantly melted into guilt. Jane shoved her hands into her pockets. So yeah. She likes games. She likes reactions. She likes making people feel small. Jane. She'll probably flirt with you next just to upset me. My eyebrows lifted. She already did. Jane's head snapped toward me. She what? Oh no. No no no. That look in her eyes was not healthy for public safety. She didn't do anything, I said quickly. What did she say? Jane. What did she say, Rose? She called me cute. Jane looked like she wanted to fistfight the entire atmosphere. I tried not to laugh. Unfortunately, I failed. Oh my God, I wheezed. You're jealous again. She's toxic. You looked ready to commit a felony over the word cute. She doesn't get to look at you. The way she said it nearly short-circuited my nervous system. Because Jane never sounded unsure about me. Possessive? Yes. Overdramatic? Constantly. But never unsure. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. She genuinely cared. Not in the playful club flirting way. Not in the temporary situationship way. No. Jane cared in the dangerous way. The forever kind. The kind that could either become marriage or emotional destruction. Honestly, with her personality, maybe both. You know, I said softly, normal people say things like I missed you. Jane stepped closer slowly. I'm not normal people. No kidding. Rain misted across my skin while she looked down at me with that same expression that always made me feel like prey volunteering to stand closer to the wolf. You still stayed, she murmured. That was the problem. I always stayed. Even when Jane annoyed me. Even when she confused me. Even when she made me want to throw a shoe at her beautiful face. I stayed because every time she looked at me, I felt chosen. Like in a crowded world full of noise, her eyes found me first. And maybe that made me stupid. But God, it made me happy too. I should go home, I whispered. Jane's expression darkened instantly. Not angry. Just disappointed. And somehow disappointment from Jane felt worse than jealousy. I can drive you. I can take a taxi. I know. The tension stretched between us again. Then Jane sighed softly. Rose. The way she said my name sounded unfairly intimate. Like she had memorized it. Like she carried it around in her mouth all day. What? I asked quietly. I don't want tonight to end badly. Something inside my chest melted. Unfortunately, before I could answer. Janie. Both of us turned. Lena stood outside the club entrance beneath a black umbrella, looking elegant enough to make rich women nervous. I immediately disliked her again. Jane's face hardened. What do you want? Lena ignored her completely. Instead, she looked at me. Rose, right? That depends who's asking. Lena smiled slightly. Cute and sarcastic. Dangerous combination. Jane moved closer beside me instantly. Protective. Possessive. Mine energy. Lena noticed it too. Actually, she seemed entertained by it. You always get attached too fast, Lena told Jane calmly. And you always talk too much. Lena smirked. You told her about your sister yet? Jane's entire body went rigid. I frowned. There's more? Oh, sweetheart, Lena said softly. There's a lot more. Jane stepped forward immediately. Stop. Lena tilted her head. Or what? For one horrifying second, I genuinely thought Jane might kiss her or punch her. Maybe both. The chemistry between them was frightening. Not romantic. Worse. History. Old wounds. Old love. Old destruction. It hung around them like smoke. Lena looked at me again. You should ask Jane why she really hates clubs. Jane's voice dropped dangerously low. Lena. She never told you? Lena pretended to pout. That's disappointing. What happened? I asked carefully. Jane looked furious now. Not performative anger. Real anger. The kind sitting deep in the bones. Lena's smile faded slightly. She proposed to me in a club bathroom, Lena said quietly. My heart skipped. What? She got down on one knee with shaking hands, Lena continued. And I said yes. I stared at Jane. Jane looked away immediately. Oh. Oh no. My chest suddenly hurt for reasons I did not enjoy. Because it was one thing knowing Jane had an ex. It was another thing imagining her in love enough to propose. Lena's eyes softened slightly for the first time all night. She loved me very much, she admitted. Jane laughed bitterly. Past tense. You stopped letting me love you. You slept with my sister. The words exploded into the rain. Silence crashed afterward. Even the traffic suddenly felt quieter. Lena flinched slightly. Jane looked furious with herself for yelling. And I stood there between them realizing I had accidentally fallen into the middle of a romance apocalypse. Fantastic. Truly excellent life choices from me lately. Lena recovered first. She kissed me first, she whispered. Jane looked disgusted. You still stayed. You stopped seeing me. I was working 3 jobs. You cared more about survival than me. Jane laughed in disbelief. Oh, I'm sorry for trying to pay rent, Lena. Stop, I interrupted suddenly. Both women looked at me. Rain poured harder now. My chest tightened painfully as I looked between them. You two are exhausting. Jane blinked. Lena actually laughed. No, seriously, I continued. This is insane. You're both staring at each other like divorced supervillains. That made Lena laugh harder. Even Jane's lips twitched slightly. Good. Maybe humor could save me from this emotional battlefield. Spoiler alert. It could not. Because right then, a drunk woman stumbled out of the club, saw Jane, and immediately wrapped herself around Jane's arm. Jane, the woman slurred happily. Where did you disappear to? The world stopped. Jane froze. I froze. Lena looked delighted again. And the drunk woman looked at me. Oh, she said slowly. New girlfriend? My eye twitched. Jane immediately removed the woman's arm from hers. Clara, go home. Clara pouted dramatically. You used to like when I hugged you. Excuse me? Used to? Used to? The jealousy that entered my body at that exact moment could have powered an entire country. Jane looked at me. I looked at Jane. And suddenly every rational thought abandoned my brain like workers escaping a collapsing building. Wow, I said softly. You really collect women like Pokemon cards. Jane groaned. Rose? No, continue. I'm learning so much tonight. Clara squinted at me drunkenly. She's cute. Lena burst out laughing again. Jane looked one inconvenience away from throwing herself into traffic. And honestly? Watching the terrifying Jane Carter get bullied by 3 women at once was unexpectedly hilarious. But beneath the humor, beneath the flirting, beneath the jealousy, something else was growing. Something hotter. More dangerous. Because every time another woman touched Jane, I hated it. And that realization terrified me most of all. I should have gone home. A smart woman would have. A sane woman definitely would have. Instead, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Jane Carter's car at 2 in the morning while emotional chaos sat between us like a third passenger nobody invited. The windshield wipers moved back and forth through the rain with dramatic determination, and the silence inside the car felt thick enough to choke on. Jane drove with one hand gripping the steering wheel tightly. Too tightly. You're angry, she said finally. I stared out the window. You have a woman in every corner of the city. Jane groaned softly. Rose. There's Lena. An ex. There's Clara. A mistake. There are probably 12 more hidden in your apartment walls. That actually made her laugh. A real laugh. Warm and low and annoyingly attractive. You're jealous, she murmured. I'm considering homicide. Cute. I'm serious. You threatened murder over me. I'm touched. I crossed my arms dramatically. This is not funny. Jane glanced at me briefly. Rainwater reflected across her face in silver streaks from the passing streetlights, making her look unfairly cinematic for someone causing me emotional damage. You know, she said softly, you're the only person I've wanted to take home in months. My stomach betrayed me instantly. Because apparently my body had no standards. I looked away quickly before she could see the effect she had on me. That line probably works on everyone. It doesn't, Jane said quietly. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. Dangerous. That woman's sincerity was somehow more dangerous than her flirting. The car stopped at a red light. Jane turned toward me fully now, one arm resting behind my seat. Rose. What? You matter to me. There it was again. That terrifying honesty. The kind that made my heart feel too large for my ribs. I opened my mouth to respond. Then Jane's phone rang through the speakers. The screen lit up. Lena calling. I blinked slowly. Jane looked like she wanted to drive directly into the ocean. You have got to be kidding me, she muttered. I folded my arms tighter. Your fan club is active tonight. Jane declined the call immediately. Then it rang again. And again. And again. Oh my God, I whispered. She's literally haunting you. Jane rubbed her forehead. Ignore her. She seems emotionally committed to not being ignored. The phone buzzed again with another message. Jane looked genuinely exhausted now. Not annoyed. Not angry. Tired. The kind of tired that sat deep behind the eyes. She used to do this whenever we fought, Jane admitted quietly. My jealousy softened slightly. She spam calls you? She panics when she feels abandoned. I frowned. And you answer? I used to. The rain hammered harder against the windshield. For a second, Jane looked heartbreakingly sad. Not because she still loved Lena. No. It felt worse than that. Like someone who once survived a fire but still smelled smoke everywhere. I swallowed carefully. You really loved her. Jane laughed once without humor. Enough to ruin my life for a while. That sentence sat heavily in the car. And suddenly I realized something awful. Jane acted possessive because she was terrified. Terrified of betrayal. Terrified of replacement. Terrified that love always came with humiliation waiting around the corner. My chest ached unexpectedly. Before I could say anything, Jane's phone buzzed again. This time, she cursed under her breath. What now? She picked up the phone finally. What? Lena's voice exploded through the speaker loud enough for me to hear. Jane, she's at my apartment. Jane went still instantly. Who? Your sister. Oh. Oh no. Jane's grip tightened around the phone so hard I thought it might crack. What does she want? She's drunk. I don't care. She keeps asking about you. Jane closed her eyes briefly like the universe itself had become irritating. Call someone else. She's crying. That sounds like a personal problem. Jane. Good night, Lena. She hung up. Silence filled the car again. I stared at her carefully. That was cold. Jane laughed bitterly. You didn't see what they did to me. The way she said it made me stop breathing for a second. Not dramatic heartbreak. Not messy cheating. No. Something deeper. Something uglier. You never told me the full story, I said quietly. Jane kept staring ahead at the rain. She moved into our apartment while we were dating. My stomach dropped. What? My sister lost her job, Jane continued flatly. I told her she could stay with us temporarily. Every word felt heavier than the last. And Lena, Jane laughed again, empty this time. Apparently temporary wasn't just for the apartment. Jesus Christ. I felt sick for her. She'd sneak into my sister's room after I left for work, Jane whispered. and then come back into my bed pretending nothing happened. The car suddenly felt too small for all that pain. I looked at Jane differently then. Not as the jealous flirt from the club. Not as the confident woman everyone stared at. But as someone wounded. Someone trying very hard to never look wounded again. Jane, I whispered softly. I know. She smiled bitterly. Embarrassing, right? No. Her eyes flicked toward me. It's heartbreaking. That expression on her face almost destroyed me. Because for one tiny second, Jane looked vulnerable enough to break apart in my hands. Then, "Can I ask you something?" she murmured. Okay. Why are you still here? I blinked. What? You've seen the drama. The exes. The mess. Jane looked at me carefully. Most people would run. Honestly? Most people should run. Jane Carter was basically a red flag wrapped in expensive perfume. But she was also warm hands during anxiety attacks. Late-night phone calls when I couldn't sleep. Coffee delivered to my apartment because she accidentally bought too much. She remembered tiny details about me nobody else noticed. The way I hated olives. The way I played with my rings when nervous. The way thunderstorms secretly scared me even though I pretended otherwise. Jane loved loudly. Messily. Dangerously. But genuinely. And maybe that made me stupid. Still. I stayed because I like you, I admitted softly. Jane stared at me. No, I corrected myself quietly. That's a lie. Her breathing slowed slightly. I stayed because every time I try leaving you alone in my head, I feel miserable. The atmosphere inside the car changed instantly. Heavier. Hotter. Jane looked at me like I had just confessed something sacred. Rose. And honestly? I laughed nervously. You're so ridiculously attractive it's become a public health issue. That made her smile. Small. Real. God. That smile could have forgiven wars. You flirt when you're emotional, Jane murmured. You stare like a murderer when you're jealous. Fair. Rain thundered outside while we sat there staring at each other like two women moments away from making another terrible decision. Then Jane reached over slowly. Her fingers brushed my cheek gently. Too gently. That softness from her always felt intimate in a way her possessiveness never could. You make me feel calm, she whispered. My heart nearly exploded. Which was inconvenient because I needed that organ to survive. Jane, I whispered weakly. She leaned closer. And closer. The tension between us became unbearable. My pulse turned into complete chaos. I could smell her perfume. Feel her warmth. See every tiny detail of her mouth. Then headlights flashed behind us. A car horn blared loudly. We both jumped apart instantly. I burst into laughter. Jane groaned dramatically and dropped her forehead against the steering wheel. You've got to be kidding me. I laughed harder. Oh my God, we almost had a movie moment. We were having a movie moment. You got interrupted by traffic. Jane looked offended. Rude of them. The light had turned green. Cars waited behind us impatiently while I struggled to stop laughing. Jane finally drove again, shaking her head. You're evil. You love me. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence. My eyes widened instantly. Jane looked at me slowly. And smiled. Not playful this time. Not teasing. Something softer. Something terrifyingly real. I think I might, she said quietly. My entire soul left my body. The rest of the drive became painfully awkward because suddenly neither of us knew how to act like normal humans anymore. By the time we reached Jane's apartment building, my heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Jane parked the car. Neither of us moved. You can come upstairs, she said carefully. Dangerous invitation. Very dangerous. My brain screamed, don't do it. Unfortunately, my brain had been losing this battle for weeks. Okay, I whispered. Jane's eyes darkened instantly. And somehow, standing in that parked car with rain pouring outside and tension thick enough to drown in, I knew my life was about to become much more complicated. The elevator ride to Jane's apartment felt more dangerous than crossing a war zone. Not because anything happened. Because nothing happened. And somehow that was worse. Jane stood beside me with her hands in her pockets while soft jazz played through the elevator speakers like the universe was mocking us personally. Neither of us spoke. The tension between us had become its own living creature at this point. Huge. Hungry. And definitely not paying rent. I stared at the glowing floor numbers while trying not to think about the fact that I was going upstairs with Jane at almost 3 in the morning after confessing I basically couldn't stay away from her. Terrific decisions. Absolutely excellent life choices. The elevator doors opened. Jane's apartment sat at the end of a quiet hallway, warm golden light slipping faintly beneath the door. She unlocked it slowly, then stepped aside for me. After you. I walked in carefully. And immediately forgot how breathing worked. Her apartment looked exactly like her. Elegant. Moody. Dangerously attractive. Dark wooden floors reflected warm amber lighting from expensive hanging lamps. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the rain-soaked city skyline, and soft music drifted quietly from hidden speakers somewhere in the apartment. It smelled like coffee, perfume, and Jane. Which honestly should have been bottled and sold illegally because one inhale nearly weakened my knees. You're staring, Jane said behind me. I turned too quickly. Your apartment is rich. Jane laughed softly while tossing her keys onto the counter. That's your first observation? There's a candle in here worth more than my monthly groceries. It's sandalwood. It's financial violence. That made her laugh properly. God. That sound. Warm. Low. The kind of laugh that made me want to say funnier things just to hear it again. Jane loosened the sleeves of her black shirt while walking toward the kitchen. Wine. Yes. Dangerous answer. I'm already in your apartment at 3 in the morning, I replied. I think we passed dangerous 2 bad decisions ago. Jane paused briefly. Then smirked. You're getting bold. I'm trying to survive. She poured wine into 2 glasses while I wandered carefully around the apartment pretending I was not painfully aware of her existence behind me. There were books everywhere. Plants. Vinyl records. Photos turned face down. That last part caught my attention immediately. Interesting. Suspicious. Emotionally concerning. I picked one up carefully. Jane froze. The picture showed a younger Jane smiling beside a blonde woman. Lena. My stomach twisted. The smile on Jane's face in the photo looked different. Softer. Unprotected. Like the world hadn't hurt her properly yet. That was a long time ago, Jane said quietly. I set the frame down gently. You still keep it. Jane handed me a wine glass. I forgot to throw it away. Lie. Not a cruel lie. Not even a selfish one. Just the kind people tell when they're still trying to convince themselves they're healed. I accepted the wine carefully. The silence between us softened slightly now, no longer sharp and tense like before. Now it felt intimate. Which was somehow more terrifying. Rain rolled against the windows while the city lights glowed gold and silver behind Jane like she belonged in some heartbreak movie written specifically to ruin my emotional stability. You know what your problem is? I asked suddenly. Jane leaned against the kitchen counter. Only one? You hide serious feelings behind sarcasm. She sipped her wine slowly. And your problem is pretending you don't like attention. I gasped dramatically. I'm innocent. You literally smiled when I got jealous tonight. I did not. Jane lifted one eyebrow. Traitorous memories immediately replayed in my head. Okay. Maybe I smiled a little. But only because jealous Jane was horrifyingly attractive. Which felt like something I should discuss in therapy eventually. You dragged me across a nightclub like a Victorian husband catching his wife writing poetry to another woman, I defended. Jane looked thoughtful. That does sound dramatic enough for me. It was insane. You liked it. I pointed accusingly at her. Stop being correct all the time. Jane laughed softly again. Then her expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for the room to grow warmer. Quieter. She set her wine glass down slowly and walked toward me. Every survival instinct inside me immediately packed its bags and left. Jane stopped directly in front of me. Close enough for me to feel her warmth. Close enough for my pulse to become embarrassing. Rose, she murmured. The way she said my name should genuinely be investigated by scientists. What? I whispered. You look nervous. I wonder why. Her mouth twitched slightly. Then her fingers brushed gently against my wrist. Tiny touch. Massive consequences. Electricity shot through my entire body so fast I nearly dropped my wine glass. Jane noticed. Of course she noticed. That woman noticed everything about me. Her eyes darkened slightly. You feel that too? I swallowed carefully. Yes. God. Yes. The attraction between us had become unbearable hours ago. Now it felt volcanic. Like one wrong touch could split the entire night open. Jane stepped even closer. The city lights behind her blurred softly through the rain while her dark curls framed her face in messy waves. You drive me insane, she whispered. You say that like it's my fault. It absolutely is. I laughed nervously. Big mistake. Because Jane looked at my mouth afterward. And suddenly the atmosphere shifted completely. Heavy. Hot. Dangerous. Her finger slowly tilted my chin upward. Exactly like earlier in the club. Except now there were no loud crowds. No flashing lights. No interruptions. Just us. Just tension. Just the sound of rain and breathing. You know what I wanted to do earlier? Jane murmured softly. My heartbeat turned catastrophic. What? Her thumb brushed slowly across my lower lip. I wanted to kiss you until you forgot every other woman in that club existed. Sweet mother of emotional destruction. Jane. You looked so pretty being jealous. That's because you collect ex-girlfriends like limited edition handbags. Jane laughed quietly. Then she leaned closer. So jealous, she whispered teasingly. Before I could answer. The apartment lights suddenly shut off. Complete darkness. I screamed. Jane burst into laughter instantly. Oh my God, she wheezed. Why are you laughing? The power went out. I know that. Thunder crashed outside dramatically like the universe itself had impeccable comedic timing. I nearly walked into the couch trying to move. Jane caught my waist immediately. Strong hands. Warm body. Darkness everywhere. My brain completely stopped functioning. There you are, she murmured softly. Don't flirt during a power outage. I flirt during all emergencies. Another crack of thunder shook the windows. I grabbed her shirt instinctively. Jane went still. Then. You're scared of storms? No. Rose. Maybe a little. Jane smiled against my forehead. You're adorable. I hate you. No you don't. Unfortunately. She was right again. The city outside glowed faintly through the rain-covered windows while we stood there in darkness, tangled together accidentally. Or maybe not accidentally anymore. Jane's hand slowly slid against my waist. Gentle. Careful. Like she was asking permission without words. I looked up at her. Bad decision. Very bad decision. Because Jane looked at me like she was starving. And honestly, I probably looked the same. You're staring again, I whispered. You're beautiful. That answer hit me so hard emotionally I nearly filed a police report. Nobody should be allowed to say things like that while looking like her. Thunder rolled softly outside again. Jane's fingers moved slowly into my hair. And then she kissed me. Slow this time. Deep. Dangerously patient. The kind of kiss that made time melt into nothing. I kissed her back immediately, hands gripping her shirt while her body pressed closer against mine. Warmth exploded through me. Every touch felt amplified in the darkness. Every breath. Every tiny sound. Jane kissed like she meant every second of it. Like she wanted me dizzy. Like she wanted me ruined for anyone else afterward. Her hand slipped gently against my waist while my fingers tangled into her curls. Then, I bit her lip lightly. Jane made a quiet sound against my mouth that nearly destroyed my remaining self-control. When she pulled back, her eyes looked darker than midnight itself. Oh, she whispered softly. I immediately panicked. Oh my God, sorry. Before I could finish, Jane grabbed my waist and kissed me again harder this time, backing me gently against the wall. You have no idea what you just did to me, she murmured against my lips. The tension became unbearable again. Funny. Hot. Breathless. I started laughing halfway through kissing her because the entire situation felt insane. Jane laughed too between kisses. What's funny? The fact that your terrifying jealous behavior somehow worked on me. I knew it would. You're impossible. You're obsessed with me. I opened my mouth to deny it. Unfortunately, Jane kissed me before I could lie properly. Outside, rain hammered against the windows while the city lights shimmered endlessly below us. Inside, the night softened into tangled laughter, stolen kisses, teasing whispers, warm hands, and the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, I was already falling hopelessly in love with Jane Carter. And honestly, that might have been the most dangerous thing of all.